Okay, so you guys remember the Microsoft showcase that happened a couple weeks ago, right? Well, now that the dust has settled a bit, I, like many other people who have opinions, wanted to share what I thought about it. So to put it into context, this is after the recent June 18th Nintendo Direct. So some of my points later on in the video are related to that. Now, regardless of whether you're an Xbox fan or not, you can't deny they showed off some pretty good looking games. For starters, Black Ops 6 looks hype for fans of the series. It seems they're bringing back some of the traditional style to this. They even made a point of mentioning classic round-based zombies and Prestige. And you know, sometimes you gotta revisit the past to go forward, which is an approach I think is pretty good sometimes and can be a way to try and reinvigorate the series and look back at why it worked so well. Much like how it seems Mario and Luigi Brothership is doing. However, they're introducing the new mechanic of Omni movement, which sounds like a term that makes it seem more complex than it might actually be, but I'm also interested to fully see how it's incorporated. It seems to be a pretty interesting way to expand upon movement capabilities. Maybe it won't be anything special, or maybe it could be something the series carries on for future installments and could be a good way of shaking things up. You also got Doom the Dark Ages, which looks like it'll be a blast. You'll be able to use a gun with a skull in it, and a shield with a buzzsaw, which is so unnecessary. But at the same time, where's it been all my life? The new Perfect Dark, Gears of War, and a lot of other titles look pretty great too, but you'll probably notice a trend with a lot of these games. That trend being that they'll be on Game Pass day one. I wonder if this is Phil trying to go all in on Game Pass and increase their subscriber base. If it was, I wouldn't blame him, but just because I understand it doesn't mean I fully agree with it. I don't know if it's a direct result of it or if it played any part, particularly when the games of the recently acquired studios are coming to Game Pass day one. It might not be true and maybe I'm looking for a pattern that isn't there, but that's probably why Arcane and Tango were shut down. The Activision Blizzard acquisition was probably too hefty of an amount, and it probably wasn't an easy decision to make, but the team at Xbox probably figured they'd cut their losses because they probably couldn't sustain the company long term while some of the studios that shut down were still operating. And while Hi-Fi Rush was a great game, it probably wasn't enough to save both Tango Works and Arcane Austin from being shut down. But how do you think a lot of people were playing it? Probably on Game Pass, right? I'm not claiming to be an expert on this stuff, but that probably hurt some of its sales despite the positive reception it received. Sure, Shadow dropping it the way they did maybe hurt some sales too, but I feel like sometimes they'd be hard to gauge or determine with complete certainty, considering the positive reception from reviews and word of mouth in today's day and age. With Microsoft seeming to prioritize putting games that they know will be their heavy hitters on Game Pass, since that's probably how a lot of people played games like Hi-Fi Rush. I mean, look at this official tweet from the Hi-Fi Rush account celebrating 3 million players. They're very specific to mention that it's 3 million players and not 3 million units sold. It's a very impressive feat, don't get me wrong, but if you look at a celebration artwork for Persona 5 reaching a milestone, for example by Shigenori Soejima, you'd see it mentions the number of units sold. Or even Nier Automata achieving the milestone of selling 8 million copies when combining the physical and digital sales. So you'll notice from these examples that they specifically mention the amount of units sold rather than the number of players, which I feel would be more reserved for online multiplayer oriented games like Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft rather than single player games. We also gotta consider that upon release, Hi-Fi Rush was only on sale digitally, which gave the players who wanted to play it options consisting of, would I want to spend the $30 or play it for about half the price or technically free since it's included with a Game Pass subscription? People are usually going to go the more economical route, and I don't blame them. And again, sadly Hi-Fi Rush doesn't make that distinction because it probably can. This could be a stretch, but if some of that player base was able to translate into sales, maybe Tango could have been able to stick around for a little bit longer if they had the sales numbers to reflect their success. Aside from being free on Game Pass, would releasing a physical copy have been enough to help? Ideally, I'd like to think so, but realistically, most likely not. So is it Microsoft's fault for the studio shutdowns? Well, I think a fair amount, but there might be some unintentional fault from the general consumer as well. Since I think voting with your wallet really is a powerful thing to do, especially when it's a lot of people doing so. Seeing as these companies deciding not to follow through with fan requests for sequels, often found the games underperforming in the sales department. That's why there's no sequel to games like Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time. At least not yet, hopefully, which is why the series is currently ended on a cliffhanger, and why the future of that series is left in uncertainty. Beyond Good and Evil is a game that released a positive reception, but because it had poor sales, Ubisoft put it on the back burner to focus their marketing on one of their other games, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, which released around the same time as Beyond Good and Evil. Or even the Sega Dreamcast failing in sales the way it did after the PlayStation 2 launched, despite the Dreamcast being innovative with its online play and other features. Fortunately, however, in more recent years the public have really come around to appreciate it more. But it was a little too late, and Sega decided to go third party and abandon the console business. With the commonality linking these examples is a mostly positive reception, but horrible sales coming from lack of buyers, be it from bad marketing or other factors. There's probably a plethora of other projects or planned sequels that fell through because a game or idea didn't financially perform well. Because despite positive reception and being vocal about your liking of a game, sometimes if the sales numbers don't reflect what these companies view as a substantial profit, they aren't going to bother making a sequel since they don't feel that there will be any money to be made. However, things have played out the way they have and we can't change that, and it's certainly not realistic to expect that we can prevent anything else we don't want from happening, like Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks being shut down, the Dreamcast failing, or some other games not getting the sequels that they probably deserve. Especially when the companies themselves may not do the best advertising of their game, which isn't the fault of the consumer if they're initially turned off before they even try it. And while word of mouth can help, sometimes it's not early enough to make an impression on the initial sales of the game, and the game unfortunately not gaining the momentum it needs. My point is that when this isn't the case, even though we can't always prevent matters such as these, we gotta at least try to support companies that are doing things right by buying games and showing we appreciate them. We could also show them when they're doing something wrong by choosing not to buy them or letting them know when they're doing something wrong, keeping them honest when we need to. It sounds like a no-brainer, but I think any effort, no matter how small, could make quite a difference. It may not always work, but it did when Microsoft reversed their decision of incorporating the DRM and online policies for the Xbox One after the justifiable outcry from consumers. Raising our voices en masse, either by respectfully voicing our displeasure or with our money. They may be small steps, but they're steps nonetheless. Those are just two effective methods that I can think of that can be done to enact positive change and can be effective depending on the situation. But I also do think a fair chunk is on Microsoft for enticing people with something such as Game Pass. However, with how much I and many others enjoyed Hi-Fi Rush, I'm sure there would have been a fair chunk of people that would have been glad to support it if it wasn't immediately on Game Pass, and if we knew it could mean that Tango would still be around to make more games of similar quality to Hi-Fi Rush, or even a sequel. I honestly can't blame the customers that much though, especially since a lot of people choose to buy games digitally, and Game Pass makes things a lot more convenient for them. It's economically smart for the customer too, because hypothetically, would you rather buy a game for full price, possibly not enjoy it, and then end up keeping it because you didn't want to feel like you wasted money? And even then, if you sold it, you'd get less money back than you bought it for anyway, so would it even be worth it half the time? Or would you rather spend a roughly $20 flat monthly rate and have access to a whole library of games that most of the time not only has the game you already wanted to buy included in your subscription, but a whole bunch of other great games as well? Most of the time you may feel like you only need to play the game once anyway, because after that you got all the enjoyment you could out of it. Why not go with the option that seems to work for the customer? Let's remember that Persona 3 Reload was revealed at an Xbox event, so you know they probably worked something out with Sega and Atlus about launching the game on Game Pass day one for free, and also the expansion pass containing the Answer DLC for free as well. With the partnership that Microsoft made with Sega, and by extension Atlus, being made public. I could be wrong, but that's probably why that expansion pass is $35 on other platforms, so that Sega/Atlus can recuperate a possible loss in profits. But my point with this example is, sure, companies enjoy making games, but they probably also enjoy making a profit as well. So why not try to entice more people into subscribing to Game Pass by including the more known franchises like Call of Duty, Doom, Gears of War, Persona, and so on, especially when it may net the most potential for success and seems to be the path Microsoft is heading. Another part I hadn't mentioned about the showcase yet was the reveal of new Xbox Series consoles being released this holiday season. Sure, there's going to be a 2TB Series X with a disk drive as part of the console, but they're also releasing a 1TB Series S and a 1TB digital Series X. And while there's still going to be physical games and a Series X with higher storage, it seems to me that purchasing games digitally is their priority, or essentially renting them on Game Pass. Especially when more of their consoles that they're releasing seem to be reflective of a digital media priority to me. Since the ownership of a game in the case of owning a digital media based console is dependent on having a Game Pass subscription, or how long the same game would be on the service or the console's in-game store for if they end up being taken off. Whereas with physical games, you don't have to worry about losing access to playing a game if it was removed from Game Pass or the console's built-in game store. Don't get me wrong, I personally think that $20 or however much anyone is spending on it for a vast library of games, especially when Microsoft occasionally offers the $1 for a free 14 days or a free month deal, it's almost too good of an offer to pass up. Which is why I still have a subscription despite being mostly favorable to owning physical games. Moving along, Phil Spencer's admitted to wanting both Xbox games on competitors' consoles, but also the competing console games to be playable on the Xbox family of consoles, as well as Microsoft expanding Game Pass to PC and trying to expand the player base in other areas to allow the freedom of playing Xbox games on different devices. And sure, he has said that Xbox currently has no plans for Game Pass going to the competing console rivals such as Sony and Nintendo. It doesn't mean he won't consider it in the future. It might not happen, but anything is possible, right? Especially when that could be a means of expanding Xbox's reach to other consoles, much like how Phil hopes for. And in return, their competitors' games would be coming to Microsoft platforms. They even phased out Xbox Live Gold and incorporated it with Game Pass to make Game Pass Ultimate. So they're putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, and trying to increase their subscriber base, slowly expanding it from beyond the Xbox family of consoles to PC, to Xbox Cloud Gaming for Android and iPhone devices, and even smart TVs and VR headsets, further showing Microsoft's focus towards digital media and their emphasis on Game Pass. Yes, I know that Microsoft still releases physical games and might not stop anytime soon. I still feel that they provide more incentive to buy games digitally. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of Xbox's focus on digital media, but I do think competition is a good thing, and I think they may have stuff to contribute and some possible surprises left as a current major competitor. Maybe they have something planned that may work that I just haven't mentally conceived of yet. Although it seems that, as of now at least, some developers are, and maybe dismissive is a strong word, but some developers don't seem concerned with Microsoft platform sales. While Xbox did reveal some great looking games during their showcase, a fair amount of them were multi-platform. Then again, some of the games that were shown off during last week's Nintendo Direct were also multi-platform. However, the Xbox consoles are excluded from some of those announcements. Sure, Xbox is still receiving some games like Fantasia and Neo Dimension, the Dragon Quest 2D HD trilogy, Mio Memories in Orbit, and a few others, but if you look it up, you'd see that games such as LEGO Horizon Adventures, Darkest Dungeon 2, Fairy Tail 2, Farmagia, Romancing Saga 2, Revenge of the Seven, Phantom Brave The Lost Hero, Hello Kitty Island Adventure, and even the Marvel vs. Capcom arcade collections are coming to Nintendo and Sony platforms, with no mention of ports to Xbox platforms. That's a huge chunk of games that will be missing from the Xbox library, or at the very least not yet confirmed. So that's not really doing any favors for Xbox if developers were giving up on porting games to the Xbox consoles. Most of the time you can usually expect for third-party games to release on PlayStation and Xbox first, but sometimes those games do eventually end up being ported to the Switch because it is a high-selling console. With a fair amount of games coming out the rest of this year and into next, only confirmed to be releasing to Sony and Nintendo consoles. So since there's a huge demographic of Switch owners, It would only make sense that the Switch ports of third-party games would usually sell pretty well, and the effort of porting them to the Switch is profitable and warranted. It's different because with the Switch, a possible port is likely. If it does happen, it might not happen right away, but it could eventually, even if it takes until the next new Nintendo console. But with ports of those games only being on the Sony and Nintendo consoles, and not on Xbox at the same time or around the same time, makes me think it probably won't happen. Despite not agreeing with some of their practices, I would like Microsoft to stay in the race because the competition forces Nintendo and Sony to try to do better if Microsoft starts to do better. Full disclosure, I think competition is good and keeps the competitors in check, so to speak, and that the competition may spark innovation. Maybe if Xbox is successful in the next generation, they might be more likely to be considered to have more ports for a variety of games. I just don't want Microsoft to end up like Sega if they for some reason do decide to drop out of the console race and become a third-party developer and publisher. I also don't like this possible shift to digital-only media and cutting out the option of some games receiving physical copies, such as Hi-Fi Rush when it first launched. With the Xbox consoles shifting and focusing on Game Pass and trying to garner subscribers by having day one Game Pass releases. But I guess we'll have to see how things play out and if Game Pass really will be Microsoft's unwavering plan for the foreseeable future. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for listening to this long tangent, and sorry if my thoughts seem a bit scattered. I hope you enjoyed it though, or got something out of it. Let me know your thoughts on the ideas I presented in this video in the comments section below, be it if you respectfully agree or disagree with my points, or can possibly elaborate on my ideas and even correct some assumptions I made. But until the next one, take care.